Get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is David Bryant. I'm the Communications and Engagement Manager at the California Native Plant Society. And we're so thrilled today that you're joining us for a wildlife adventure. I'm really excited for you to see these astounding images. They are real proof and testament to the power of native plants to transform gardens into habitat. And so we're so excited to show you these images taken by Scott Logan in the Gottlieb Native Garden and to talk to Susan Gottlieb a little bit about her garden and her experience. So before we go a little bit further, I want to introduce my colleague, Liv O'Keefe. She is the Senior Director of Communications and Engagement at CNPS. Hi, Liv.
Hi, David, and hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight.
So,
go ahead, David.
Oh, well, I just wanted to ask you, Liv, we're in a very particular time of the year, which is fall planting season. Can you tell us why and what is that?
Okay, so a lot of people, well, at least people new to gardening, tend to think about spring as the time to start their gardens and get out there and plant. It's when everything's in bloom, and people tend to think about spring that way. But fall is actually the perfect time to get our plants in the ground. And especially, right now and up until the winter rains start, it's really a great chance to get your plants in the ground and get them well established right along with the winter rains. And, with that in mind, we kind of saved this webinar as our best for last with our, native plant fall planting season kickoff is a real source of inspiration for you today.
Beautiful. Yeah, so today's talk really focuses around habitat gardening, and the Gottlieb Native Garden is a great exemplar of that. And today we're going to be talking to Scott Logan and Susan. Scott is a naturalist and photographer who has been documenting wildlife in the Gottlieb Native Garden for over 5 years and has captured more than 400 species in these insanely beautiful, really riveting photographs that capture ephemeral moments and really beautiful wildlife encounters. And ultimately, again, are proof of the power of native plants being able to create habitat even in a residential context. So we're really excited to have them both on today. And so just for a little bit more of an understanding, the Gottlieb Native Garden is 1 acre and it's in the heart of Los Angeles. And through Scott's photography and other forms of documentation, over 400 species have been captured. So it's in that spirit, we're going to be seeing some amazing, amazing, amazing images today that just, I'm astounded. Having been in the native plant world for a while, I'm just blown away by how many different species intersect and depend and rely on this beautiful garden. So Liv, before we go further, I was wondering, could you just give us kind of a structure or flow of tonight's webinar?
Sure, yeah. So we're going to spend the first part of tonight diving in with Scott. Scott's going to take us through some of his amazing photography and talk about what he has seen and observed there at the garden and how the garden has served as a source of inspiration for a lot of his work. So you're really going to get to see, it's going to be a real treat for you here as we go through what Scott has to share with us in the first half. And then our second half tonight, we're going to talk to Susan Gottlieb herself about this garden journey that she's been on. And it's really inspiring to hear, how she got started and how it's evolved over time and what it's become. So we hope you enjoy hearing from them as much as we've enjoyed getting to know them and talking to them over the years. And their stories are both really incredible.
Beautiful. So without further ado, I want to introduce one more time Scott Logan, a photographer and naturalist. Thank you so much, Scott, for being on tonight, and we turn the presentation over to you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, David, for that wonderful introduction. And I feel really privileged to be part of this evening's webinar. I also want to take this opportunity to thank Susan Gottlieb for allowing me to spend so much time in her marvelous garden and for being so supportive of my wildlife endeavor there. So with that, I guess we can get to the presentation. Give me 1 second here, please. All right. So I know that many of you watching this presentation may not live in Los Angeles, but the message is the same wherever you reside. Native plants attract native wildlife. So I was born and raised in Los Angeles, and I've always marveled at how much wildlife can be found in a city that contains over 4 million human inhabitants. But I was surprised to find out how diverse this wildlife could be in just one urban yard, a yard landscaped with California native plants. For the past 6 years, as the garden's naturalist, I've been documenting the wildlife that utilizes this space as well as coordinating and participating in university-led study. The Gottlieb Native Garden continues to prove, without a doubt, that we can begin to repair the negative effects caused by decades of urban development and support native wildlife by simply planting native plants. So you probably won't recognize me in this photo, but as the Gottlieb Garden's naturalist, this is how I spend much of my time, literally lying in the bushes with my camera, or in this case, lying in the buckwheat. My subject in this shot was this large grass spider with a just captured honeybee. Up to this point, I've been able to identify nearly 500 species of animals on the property. This would include tiny insects up to some of LA's largest mammals. Over 100 species of birds are on that list. A few of those species were one-day wonders, but the majority of them spend a considerable amount of time in the garden. One of our resident birds is pictured here, the small and sassy house wren. Another impressive list is the 25 species of mammals utilizing this one urban yard. Our latest mammal species recorded in the garden was a western mastiff bat. This brings the total to 9 confirmed bat species hunting for insects in the garden's airspace. I happened to capture this moment with a thermal imaging camera. The garden's ability to attract and to provide for such a wide variety of animal species has caught the attention of researchers, educators, and a broad range of environmental groups, including the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles and National Geographic magazine. Being a photographer, this was a highlight for me as I got to spend 3 days with a National Geographic Society fellow, Charlie Hamilton James. The BBC has filmed in the garden, as has the National Geographic Channel. Some of the universities carrying out studies in the garden would include Loyola Marymount University, UCLA, Cal Poly, Occidental College, and the University of California, Davis. Out of all the universities, UC Davis has the longest running research program in the garden. Dr. Lisa Tell's Hummingbird Health and Conservation Program has used the garden as a study site since 2014, and I've been personally involved with this study as a contributor since 2016. Their groundbreaking work on the health and social relationships of urban hummingbirds has been published in many peer-reviewed journals. So much of the species documentation that I do for the garden is I identify these animals with photography. 2 years in, we realized a compelling wildlife story was being captured with these images, and a seed for the next Gottlieb Native Garden book was planted. That idea became a reality this summer with the release of the Gottlieb Native Garden, An Intimate Wildlife Journey. The majority of the photos from this point forward are from this just published book. Now, I thought before we get into the photos of the animals themselves, I would like to talk quickly about some of the techniques I use to get them. I like to use flash in my photography. I personally like the look and feel of mixing different light sources when creating an image. On this afternoon, I was capturing female leafcutter bees, provisioning their nests with pollen for their young. If you look at the entrances to the tubes, you'll notice they're different colors. Those hues represent the colors of the flowers or the leaves they use for capping their brood chambers. I spend a lot of time exploring at night. In this image, one of my trail cameras captured me as I was checking my camera while I was shooting nocturnal animals. Here's the bird that I was photographing that night, a common porwheel, and it was hunting from a cement swale. And the interesting fact about common porwheels, it's the only bird species in the world known to truly hibernate. I also have a few passive DSLR camera traps that I continually move around the garden. It takes a great deal of time to set them up and to keep them operating. One of the problems is that wildlife loves to chew on cables. But in the end, all the effort pays off with intimate shots like this one. These fawn siblings are no more than a day or two old. Camera traps have the ability to capture really candid moments. Oh, sorry, that's me checking on my equipment after dark. But out of all the photography featured in this project, the most technically complicated are the focus stacked images made with live animals. This would be a typical setup. A Nikon D850 controlled by an iPad with multiple flashes. Sometimes I shoot indoors so I can control the environment. Focus stacking is basically taking multiple photos to form an ultra-sharp image. It's an amazing process that has the ability to produce high detail images of very small subjects. With focus stacking, you're in complete control of sharpness and depth of field, enabling you to do things that just aren't possible with normal camera setups. This happens to be an image of a Carolina sphinx moth in front of the Gottlieb's entryway to their home, so I think it's a great place to start our photographic journey. So as we're looking at these images, I'm going to ask you to please keep in mind that every animal in this presentation is from one single yard. A yard right in the middle of Los Angeles. Some of these animals are reclusive and difficult to find, like this ring-necked snake. Others are so shy, one has to be really lucky to ever see them. But the majority of these animals, like this hermit thrush, can be found all over Los Angeles. All they need is the proper habitat, and that's where native gardening comes in. I do want to point out one thing about the garden. The east side adjoins chaparral habitat, allowing a natural entryway for species of animals that need an expanse of native habitat, like California quail and California thrasher. But the majority of these animals we get in the garden, like the cedar waxwing, could end up in virtually any of our yards. Many people think of European honeybees when they think of what they want their garden to support. But as the name implies, these bees are not native. They commandeer habitat like the screech owl box and outcompete our native bees for pollen. When a honeybee swarm moves into the Gottlieb Native Garden, it's humanely relocated like this hive that took over a barn owl box. When it comes to bees, I believe we should be focusing on the benefits of native bees, like this legated furrow bee, or this pollen-covered Slevin cellophane bee, a personal favorite of mine. In Los Angeles County alone, we have over 500 species of native bees. These bees evolved with our native flora and have become expert niche pollinators. This diversity ultimately contributes to a healthy ecosystem. The garden has approximately 25 species of regular occurring bees. This digger bee is one of them. Digger bees are entertaining to watch, especially when you can catch one cleaning pollen off its tongue while in flight. Some of these bees I find impossibly beautiful, like this female metallic green sweat bee. In the correct light, many species of sweat bees shimmer in metallic hues. There are many plant families that I consider excellent for insect pollinators, and buckwheat, which is pictured here, is one of them. But bees aren't the only pollinators working hard in your garden. Many fly species are good pollinators too. And some of these are not just good pollinators, but they benefit a garden in other ways. Take this four-spotted aphid fly, for instance. Their young are carnivorous. Females lay their eggs near aphid infestation, and once they hatch, the larvae eat large amounts of the tiny pests. After flies, other beneficial pollinators would be butterflies, moths, beetles, wasps, and of course, hummingbirds. Although not the best pollinators out there, hummingbirds don't stop pollinating when it rains. Another group of insects that we all enjoy having in our garden is butterflies. As I'm sure many of you already know, monarch butterflies can be attracted to your yard by planting milkweed for the females to lay their eggs on, as it is a host plant for their larvae. When planting milkweed, though, it's very important to plant only native varieties. For us in Los Angeles, it's A. fascicularis, or narrow leaf milkweed. Monarchs have a much better chance for a healthy reproduction cycle when using native milkweeds. And just as monarchs are attracted to milkweed, other species of butterflies have been attracted to the garden by planting host plants for their larvae. Quailbush is a host plant for the western pygmy blue, one of my favorite butterflies that we can find in the garden. Measuring at a mere 3/8 of an inch, they are the smallest butterfly found in North America and one of the smallest in the world. Butterflies and moths are not just beautiful, but are an important part of the food chain. They lay an enormous amount of eggs, which turn into caterpillars, some of which are huge, like this white-lined sphinx moth larva. But most are small. Whatever the size, insect larvae are an important food source for many animals in the garden, especially birds during breeding season. This happens to be a Bewick's wren's nest. Most native plants produce food that our native animals are familiar with, like this toyon bush. Toyon berries will be stripped from its branches by American robins and cedar waxwings without these birds ever touching the similar-looking, non-native pyracantha berries found in many ornamental gardens. Lesser goldfinches will eat native sage seeds before other native seeds. Than other non-native seeds. And hummingbirds like this Anna's know exactly what to do with blooming manzanita. While we're on the subject of food sources, the garden has a few bird feeders to augment the nourishment being provided by the native plants. Nectar feeders are the most abundant, with dozens of hummingbirds feeding at them at any given time. And of course, orioles have nectar feeders designed to accommodate their large bills. A few seed feeders are available for carnivorous birds like this California scrub jay. And mealworms are popular too, especially during breeding season. This male spotted towhee is about to bring a load back to its nest. Also, notice the cat in the upper right portion of this image? That's Sparky, one of Susan's cats in the cat run. But I can't claim that the fish in the upper pond are safe from wildlife. When herons come in for a meal, they are not chased off and allowed to hunt without being harassed. Along with food, wildlife needs a clean source of water. Here, a yellow-rumped warbler drinks early morning dew that had collected on fairy duster leaves. Water features are an excellent addition to any landscape, and the Gottlieb Native Garden has 5 of them. Not only do animals like these band-tailed pigeons drink from them, but animals bathe in them as well. Hummingbirds love their baths, as foraging for nectar can be a really sticky business. No chemicals are ever used in any of the garden's water features, and 3 of them support thriving ecosystems. Over time, these water features have become an important stop for migrating birds. Birds have an excellent memory for for all resources along their migratory paths. And every year, hundreds of migratory birds visit the garden. During late April, it's not uncommon to see groups of western tanagers jockeying for position in the lower water feature. Even a stormy afternoon didn't stop these cedar waxwings from using this water source, which is basically just a depression in a rock. So many images have stories attached to them that I want to stop on this one for a moment to tell a story about it. This photo was taken by one of my DSLR camera traps. Here's what the camera setup looked like. The bath is in the lower part of the frame. I happened to be in the garden checking on my equipment when a hailstorm began, so I retreated in the Gottlieb's home to wait it out. About a half an hour later, I returned to find an amazing rainbow. It was truly magnificent. The arc framed the garden for nearly 5 minutes. It was time enough to even see hummingbirds glow brilliant orange as they flew through the bands of color. It wasn't until the rainbow fully dissipated that I checked my camera trap and found this image. Soon after the storm had ended, the late afternoon sun had broke through the clouds and a flock of cedar waxwings flew down to drink and bathe. The timing was remarkable, and luckily my equipment functioned properly to capture the moment. Thankfully, everything performed properly for this moment as well. This is one of my favorite images captured during this entire project, and as you can see, it's more than birds that take advantage of water features. Another important component of a healthy ecosystem are predators, and they come in many shapes and sizes. We're familiar with spiders like the graceful green lynx spider, and praying mantises like this native bordered mantis. But many other animals living in our yards are fierce predators too, like this lacewing larva. If I were a small, soft-bodied insect, I wouldn't want to get near those powerful mandibles. Almost any insect needs to be wary of fence lizards, as they even climb trees. And small snakes, like this western black-headed snake, like to eat small terrestrial things like millipedes and centipedes. To give you an idea of how small the snake is, those are scrub oak leaves on the ground. Snakes come in plus sizes too. Our largest, the San Diego gopher snake, is an excellent rodent hunter. These snakes are confused with rattlesnakes all the time because they will mimic rattling with a combination of vibrating their tail and hissing. Unfortunately, this misidentification usually ends up tragic for the snake. After good long rainy periods, black-bellied slender salamanders appear. They spend the majority of their lives underground, but will venture above ground to feed and breed when the environment is wet enough to keep their skin moist. Many songbirds are excellent hunters, like this western kingbird. But even excellent hunters need to watch out for predators. No small bird in the garden is safe from Cooper's hawks. Now, I know many of you are not happy about having these predators in your yard, but they are an important part of keeping an ecosystem balanced. Raptors range significantly in scope and size. This sharp-shinned hawk, or sharpie, is about the size of a robin and has the ability to capture hummingbirds in flight. On the other end of the spectrum, in Southern California, the apex predator on wing is the great horned owl. When you pack a set of talons like that, everybody gets out of your way. And when California ground squirrel populations grow large, we see a lot more of our favorite bobcat. He happens to be collared and tagged and is known to the Park Service as B346. We call him Hank. And I'm going to back this shot up to show you something interesting. Earlier in the day, before this photo was taken, the camera got two other mammals. That's Leo the cat taking Susan for a walk in the yard. What's telling about this image is that urban wild animals are so used to humans and domestic animals, they don't seem to care about sharing the same trails with us. Breeding season in the garden is always an exciting and lively time. Animals are defining and defending territory, collecting nesting material, and building homes to raise their children. After all the preparation, the romance begins. And then the children appear, sometimes loads of them. However you feel about California ground squirrels, their babies are really cute. A magical time to tune into the garden is the period between day and night. It's that space where the diurnal animals are just finishing their shift and nocturnal animals are beginning theirs. And once it's dark, I highly recommend exploring your garden to see what you can find. Yes, there will be the usual suspects like orb spiders and moths, all of which I find extremely beautiful. I mean, the wings of moss are literally nature's canvas for elaborate tapestries. I find elder moss especially alluring. But if you simply take the time to be quiet and observe, you're sure to be amazed at what appears. Take beetles, for instance. Some species are active during the day, like this green fruit beetle, but many more are active at night. They come in amazing designs and colors, and their life cycles are fascinating. The beetle on the upper left is a firefly. Yes, we have fireflies in Los Angeles, but it's the flightless females that glow and not the flighted males. But out of all the beetles I encounter in the garden, black-bearing beetles are by far the most fantastic. They're always covered in helpful symbiotic mites, and I could do a presentation on just their life cycle alone. And let's give a shout out to striped skunks for a moment. When you notice that holes were dug in your garden the night before, you really should be saying thank you. Skunks have an excellent sense of smell and front claws built for digging. They snuffle around your garden searching for root-damaging grubs and dig them up to eat, preventing damage to your garden's plants and trees. This guy was coming from the next door neighbor's yard where apparently the sprinklers were on, and it seems that he got his face muddy while collecting dinner. Oh, and by the way, for those of you that don't like scorpions, to a skunk, they're considered a delicacy. And here's a tip for those of you that do like scorpions. The easiest way to find them at night is by searching with an ultraviolet light. Their exoskeletons glow a bluish color by absorbing the longer wavelengths in the UV spectrum, then re-emitting them in different wavelengths that are visible to us in the dark. Northern raccoons are just one of the many different characters utilizing our gardens at night. And sometimes when these animals cross paths, there's drama. I know this appears bad for the skunk, but there's no need to worry, as it was the coyote that got the raw end of this encounter. I know because this was only one frame in a series of photographs. And don't you just love the look on that skunk's face? Sometimes you run across a really unique animal, like this unusually patterned striped skunk. It makes him very easy to identify, and I know from trail cameras that he visits the yard frequently and has been around for over 3 years now. There are 2 great horned owls that have been around even longer. I began work in the garden over 6 years ago, and they've been a bonded pair that entire time. I know it's the same birds because their routine has stayed exactly the same year after year. The female owl is on the left and the male is on the right. Another animal romance is between our male bobcat, Hank, and a young female who showed up about this time last year. I wonder if she likes his Park Service bling. But whether you're prowling around on your own or wandering with others, you must always stay alert and on guard, as there are constant dangers threatening all wildlife, even animals as large as a deer. Yes, a mountain lion has even visited the garden. P22 isn't the only lion roaming the Santa Monica Mountains east of the 405 freeway here in Los Angeles. Huel, as we have affectionately named him, is an uncollared male with unknown origins. Over the past 4 years, our cameras have captured him a few times, the first being on October of 2016. What I find incredible is that he manages to stay virtually undetected to residents of neighborhoods where he roams, a testament to how these cats want nothing to do with human contact. Awe-inspiring encounters with mountain lions aside, our gardens are alive with special moments every day. I encourage you to take the time to sit quietly and observe. Special moments are sure to reveal themselves. Like an adult Cooper's hawk drying its feathers after a morning shower. Or a flock of cedar waxwings moving north during the spring. You'll know that fall is upon us with the arrival of white-crowned sparrows as they fill the air with their delightful melodies. With patience, you might witness a minor dispute over water rights at a favorite bath. The more you turn into the rhythms of your garden, the more wildlife will appear. That's how connection happens. That's the zen of it. And who knows, one day you might be sitting quietly and realize that somebody is watching you. Thank you so much for letting me share these animals with you, and I wish all of you much luck on your own wildlife journey.
Wow, thank you, Scott. That was so exquisite. I'm sure all of you are feeling just as astounded as I am with the great diversity and also the absolute expertise you have, Scott, of capturing all of these animals. So kudos to you for just capturing them, for just having the patience and the acumen to do so.
Yes, thank you.
Really beautiful. So I'd love to just ask you a few questions, Scott, in your experience. Maybe the most basic is like, what does it feel like to suddenly find a new species in the garden? You know, when you stumble on the first of its kind in the Gottlieb Native Garden.
It's always exciting. I mean, I never tire of it. Some of the discoveries have more impact than others. And, you know, on the top end of excitement, I would say it was when I was looking through the images on the trail camera and I found that mountain lion for the first time. Yeah. Very few mountain lions make it to this part of Los Angeles. So what also made it so much more remarkable is that cat was uncollared. Around here, the National Park Service captures and collars and tracks these big cats in the Santa Monica Mountains. So I knew an uncollared lion east of the 405 freeway is a big discovery. And I also have to say it was poetic because that cat entered the Gottlieb's yard, and Susan and her husband Dan are part of a large part of launching the campaign for the Liberty Canyon Wildlife Crossing, which will allow more lions into the Santa Monica Mountains.
Wow. Well, you've masterfully caught so many fleeting moments, and I'm sure that for every moment that you've captured, there's probably 1,000 that you weren't able to capture. Like, do you have some images in your memory that you can share? You know, some moments that were so special in the garden that you weren't able to capture through photography.
Let me think about that. That's a good question. It takes a lot of patience to capture good wildlife image. For me, with or without getting the shot, I'm always happy to just witness a special moment. I mean, otherwise it'd be really frustrating. What's missing in the book? I would say I really tried my best to get an image of a sharp-shinned hawk chasing a hummingbird. I also tried hard to get a usable image of a great horned owl in flight at night. I was unable to get either of those for the book, but that's okay.
Well, I want to remind everyone too that there's a new book out, The Gottlieb Native Garden, An Intimate Wildlife Journey, which features all of these amazing, amazing images and tells the story of Susan's yard, the Gottlieb Native Garden, in that context. So that's out. And do you guys want to share any details about that, Scott? And I can ask Susan too.
Well, I think the easiest thing to do if you're interested in looking into that book is to go to the GottliebNativeGarden.com. You can view both Susan's book and my book there, and it can be ordered from the websites as well.
Beautiful. So what are some of your favorite subjects? I know native bees were one of the most exciting that you talked about. You know, what are some of your favorites, and what are some that are maybe exceptionally difficult to capture as a photographer?
My favorite subjects by far are hummingbirds. I mean, they're beautiful, they're predictable, and they have tons of character. The hardest wildlife to get photos of are nocturnal animals. It's really challenging to stalk them. There's a fox that lives around here that eluded me for months. In the end, I did get a couple of usable images, but I wish I got better ones.
In your experience, and this is good for us gardeners to know, are there certain plants that are true wildlife magnets that you can kind of always rely on in your mind? You know, if I go to that plant, there's going to be something going on from a wildlife perspective.
Yep. Toyon, when it's in flower or in fruit, is a great one. You can literally sit, watch animals come to that plant. So to me, that's number one. Buckwheat, sages, and sunflowers are really great for insect pollinators. For hummingbirds, fuchsia, gooseberry, they're always good because hummingbirds are always collecting nectar from them.
So do you have any tips for our listeners about how they can observe or document wildlife in their own backyards, whether that's just through casual observation or even approaching it as a photographer?
I'll take the second question first. Okay. Documenting these days is kind of easy. We all carry around our cell phones, and although they're not, you know, for the most part, they're not taking National Geographic quality images, they do a great job getting identifiable photos. So for a novice, a great source for having those photos identified is a site called iNaturalist. You simply post your images with location information, etc., and experts will do their best to identify the images. It's also turns into a very good citizen science project because people are documenting what animals are in their area, sort of just like what we're doing in the Gottlieb Native Garden. As for observing wildlife, the best way to do it is to become part of their environment. I approach every space exactly the same way, with no expectations. I simply watch, I listen, and I vibe the space until something draws me in. Then, as carefully as I can, I integrate myself into their world. There's a rhythm to every natural space, and the trick is to insert yourself into that rhythm without disrupting it. It takes practice, but that's the zen of connecting yourself with the natural world.
Beautiful. Well, Scott, thank you so much. We really, really appreciate your presentation today.
Thank you so much.
All right. And so now we're going to turn to Susan Gottlieb to gain some insight and inspiration about how you two can do habitat gardening and what her experience has been like. So give us just a second here as we make the transition. Hey, Susan.
Hey there. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to pull
up this. It's a pleasure. Let's see. What happened? Did something happen?
No, you look great. We have a fabulous image of your garden here. So Susan, I just want to take a moment to introduce you again. You are the founder of the Gottlieb Native Garden, and you've been doing this for decades. And I really, really believe that you're an exemplar of the way that habitat gardening and planting with native plants can make great changes for local wildlife and supporting our local ecosystems. So thanks for all of your advocacy and work in that regard.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the thank you.
Yes. Well, so can you set the scene for us? Can you tell us, where your garden is located approximately and how big is it?
The garden is located in Beverly Hills. It's sort of up behind the Beverly Hills Hotel, about a mile up. And it's the property is an acre. And over the 30 years that I've been working on it, I finally made it all the way down to the bottom of the back hill. So although we don't have stairs and paths all the way down, they go down most of the way.
Yeah,
So,
beautiful.
yeah.
And so can you tell us a little bit about the before? What was in your garden, as you arrived, and also kind of what were some of your first iterations of your landscaping before you got started with native plants?
Well, the hillsides were covered with ivy, and at least the close hillsides around the house. Farther down the hill, they were whatever would grow. Actually, there were a couple of natives down there. There was some elderberry, and a couple of black walnuts. There were no oaks, though. Somebody, Dan Cooper, told me that he thought that canyon was probably at one time an oak woodland with oak black walnut and oak woodland. So the rest of it was just non-native weeds. And so I started on the hillside closest to the house with a small patch. I removed the ivy. And I had at that time, I didn't know about native plants. I just wanted to do a water conservation project. So I just researched drought tolerant plants. And during the course of my research, I discovered native plants, and I didn't twig to it quite right away, but the more I read about the reason for using native plants and the wildlife benefits, it just made so much sense that I started tearing out all the non-native plants that I just put in, and went for the natives. At the time, the native plants weren't that available. The Theodore Payne Foundation was there, but I didn't find that one right away. But once I did, I just took off with that. And
well, and I love the transformation. I mean, like even on this slide, from what the landscaping was like before, and then just this insanely rich, beautiful, hillside of Dudleya and Encilia, which is the California sunflower. I mean, just from an aesthetic point of view, it seems so much more alive.
Oh yeah, the Encilia has really attracted a lot of seed-eating birds, and one of the reasons I put in so much Encilia is because in the wild areas around where we live and hike, like Franklin Canyon and Tree People Canyon, the hillsides are just covered with Encilia. Unfortunately, there's a lot of mustard in there too, but not in my yard. But the Tree People has a lot. But originally, I had put Ceanothus Yankee Point on that hillside, and over a period of time, it started to fade away, and so that's when I decided I would I just decided at some point that I would just use plants that I was finding in the local chaparral, like Franklin Canyon and Tree People. I figured that would pretty much ensure that they were going to survive.
Right.
So, and that the local wildlife would appreciate those plants. What's on the screen now on the left is the downhill, one of the downhill east-facing slopes, which looks pretty bad, I guess. And the one on the right is the afterward.
Glorious.
So Yeah, and we're a period of time, I just kept going downhill, and we didn't have any stairs on that hillside originally. When they had to clear the weeds on the hillside, they had to throw a rope around a tree that happened to be up near the patio and haul everything up from that way. And sometimes they would go actually down the hill and haul it out. But anyway, we've got stairs now. It's much easier, but it's a schlep.
It's glorious. I just love the way that you've designed the yard with the terraces essentially. And it brings up a good point. I think native plants in your case, in your garden are wonderful for erosion control as well. And you're saying, you're going out into the hillsides, into the local canyons and mountains in the Santa Monica Mountains, and you're replicating some of the ecosystems you're seeing there. And of course there's topography, and those plants are maintaining the embankments. So there's also a great, facet of erosion control that native plants help support.
Yes, that's for sure. We've got a lot of baccharis on the hillsides, which is a pretty fast growing plant. But we've put in oaks and more elderberry, scrub oak, redberry, whatever we find on the hillsides. Yeah, a lot of salvias.
And so how did you come to discover native plants? You said Theodore Payne was local to you. What, as you were transitioning from, say, kind of just general water-wise plants and succulents to native plants, what started hooking you into the native plant world?
The Theodore Payne Foundation, it's hard to imagine, but when I started this garden, there was no internet. Now we have so much information on the internet. It's just a godsend, really. And I actually, the CNPS Cowscape site is so helpful. Thank you very much.
Yes. I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yes. What else was I going to tell you? Of course,
well, it's a good. I think you're a pioneer in this, in the sense that you were planting native plants specific to your region. It's so important for local, because California is a huge state, and so what's a native plant? In Humboldt County, sure, it's native to the California floristic province, but it might not have as much ecosystem, support as a native plant that's specific to, say, Los Angeles County. And so
right.
Your yard demonstrates that so beautifully. Sorry, go ahead.
I forgot what I was going to say.
Well, I just wanted to say thanks for mentioning Cowscape, because that is a tool for you to now use. All of you listening out there, it's amazing. You can do it after the webinar. Just go to cowscape.org, and you can type in your address or even zip code, and it's going to generate a list of specific plants to your region, which is really amazing. And it goes even further. You can look up those plants on Cowscape, and it will tell you what nurseries carry them. So it's a really great resource to have and to use to think about plants that are very specific to your neighborhood. And as you, Susan, mentioned, another great way to do that too is just taking hikes in your local area and really jotting down what you're seeing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or taking a picture with your iPhone.
Yeah, right. So can you tell us, Susan, some of the benefits that you've experienced with native gardening? We talked about erosion control. Are there some other things and facets about native plants that
well, it's definitely nice not to have to use insecticides and fertilizers, and not a lot of water, as most native plants are drought tolerant, although they're definitely wetland plants. I have got some streamside orchids in the yard, because one of the water features has a habit of splashing water, and I just could not get it to stop doing that. So I thought, well, I'll take advantage of it, and I put in some streamside orchids, and they just took off. They're just so beautiful. And there I have a little wetland plant growing in my dry chaparral garden.
I love that so much, because I think you're one of the very few people I've ever seen that has been successful at growing those streamside orchids, and you really hacked it with that fountain.
Oh yeah, the roots, I mean, they got so big, that we had to take the whole fountain and clear out the roots because
Oh
it
my
was blocked. So
That's amazing.
yeah, they love it there.
Yeah, because I've seen them in the wild along natural seeps in the San Gabriel Mountains where there is constant water trickling down. So,
Right.
taking advantage of those little places in your garden and, just, kind of thinking what's going to emulate the habitat environment.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so cool. I'm so glad. So they're doing almost too well.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah. I'd love to touch on, Scott touched on a little bit in his presentation, but the evolution of your garden, and of course, from the ornamental landscaping to this amazing native plant garden. I mean, just look at that amazing oasis of native plants, but also to the research that's going on there. There's so much vitality in terms of the wildlife that's visiting, that you've gained interest from scientific groups to conduct studies. And I was just hoping you might be able to touch on that a little bit about what people are doing in your yard.
Well, gosh, the UC Davis program is huge, of course, and Scott talked about that quite a bit. We've had well, of course, the bats that we're tracking now, and we've had one young guy was studying the number of bees in various native gardens in the area. What else? Let's see. What else have we got going on there?
Well, and Dr. Lisa Tell has found some really amazing things out about the hummingbirds and their visiting feeders and just kind of their behavior, right, in the back.
Yeah, it's been quite a wonderful experience, actually, to have them come to the yard. They're so professional and so just so smart. And to see them handling the birds the way they do, and just the birds just I'm sure they're wondering what the heck happened to them, but they just fly off, and then they often will come back before the day is over just to get some more food. And sometimes they get recaptured, but
that's great. I loved your honesty in telling me, along the way there's been some small tragedies. There's Manzanita that passed away. So for everyone
that was not a small tragedy, David. That was a big one. And that was a beautiful Manzanita. And it just not all of a sudden, I guess, but it just started to die. And right next to it was a very large Ceanothus Ray Hartman. They were two specimen plants, which in my ignorance, I didn't know what they were, how they were going to grow or what was going to happen. But they both died at the same time. And now up there, I have an incredible mesquite that is just a beautiful tree. So you'll have to come and see that.
Oh, that's amazing. And I love too, I mean, you do a lot in the yard to encourage wildlife, even beyond the native plants, like leaving the Manzanita up for a while can be, shelter and raw material for birds. You leave some nesting material out occasionally. You have the bee housing. What are some other ways that you can kind of entice wildlife and support them in addition to native plants?
In addition to native plants, well,
yeah.
Of course, we do put the nesting materials out for them. We have 5 water features. We have the cat run, which keeps the cats at bay. Of course, it also keeps the cats protected from the wildlife. What else do we have up there? The native plants are, of course, pretty much the main thing, because the wildlife uses not just what we put out for them for nesting material, but also the plants themselves.
Right.
I must say that the garden has been a godsend during this COVID thing. And it has allowed me, the COVID shutdowns have really allowed me to enjoy the garden in a way that I haven't before, because, I've always been busy and always running off doing something else. And now, pardon?
Doing webinars, for instance.
Yeah, at least that's nearby. Um, and it also has provided a bit of a sanctuary for our friends that come and visit. So we don't spend much time in the house anymore, and especially not when we're visiting. And even though it's starting to get chilly, we're still using our backyard a lot more. And I think that people have been sort of surprised because usually when they come over, there's something going on, like a party or a dinner or whatever. And the garden, unless it's an actual tour, is kind of second to whatever else is going on. But now they're sitting in the garden and listening to the birds and being kind of amazed by all the activity.
That's beautiful. That's exactly what I wanted to ask you, is just in your personal life, how has native gardening and all of the wildlife that has been drawn to your garden, affected you? Like what is the feeling you get, the emotions that you feel with just being surrounded by all of this wonderful wildlife and native plants?
It's hard to even describe. It's, it's always a pleasure. And with Scott around and pointing out so much of the wildlife activity, it's just incredible. They're just amazing moments. It's just a pleasure to look at the plants in their various stages during the year. And there was something I was going to tell you, but God, my mind is going. But
no, it was beautiful.
The garden itself it didn't start out as a lifetime project, but it has consumed me in many ways and has become my life because I've been surrounded by people who, in one way or another, are attached to the garden through the birds or through the mammals or through the plants or the insects. There's just a lot of interest, and these people are amazing people, and the groups that they belong to are amazing as well. I mean, at the top of the list, of course, is the California Native Plant Society, and then there's the Theater of Pain and the Nature Conservancy and the Wildlife Federation, and I mean, there's just an amazing number of groups that we've worked with over the years. Also, when we had our wildlife and nature photography gallery, we met an awful lot of very interesting people through that, and there was sort of a bit of a convergence of the people we met there with the garden as well. So the garden has been an amazing part of my life.
It's amazing.
Although when I first started it, it was really a water conservation project, and I told Dan, my husband, that I wanted to remove the ivy because we weren't watering it enough, and it looked awful, and he didn't think that was such a good idea and wondered why I would want to do that. Perfectly good ivy.
Perfectly good ivy.
Yeah, in his mind. And I said, well, it doesn't provide anything much except, a place for the rats to live. And he said, well, he said, that's why they call that out there the outside and this in here the inside. The rats live out there and we live in here. But anyway, I convinced him that it was a good idea to get rid of the ivy and get something else going in there. And he, fortunately, even though for a long time he did not understand what the heck I was doing, and a lot of people didn't understand what the whole object was. But when I really got a break was when Huell Hauser came to the garden during the first garden tour. And he was doing a piece about water conservation with native plants. And he came to the garden. He was going to only spend 15 minutes there, but he was such a professional. He had really done his homework, and he got so into it that he ended up doing a half-hour show on the Gottlieb garden and a half-hour on another garden, both of which he had only intended to do 15 minutes on. And these programs were on his California's Green program, not the California Gold that we all know. So it was too bad we lost Huel when we did, but I was happy to have met him.
Did you name the mountain lion in his honor?
Yes, we did.
I love it.
We did. Now, how many Huels do you know?
I know. Well, Susan, just thank you so much for all of your insight, your advocacy, and thanks for taking the time tonight to share your story and to be on with Scott tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
All right, so I hope Susan and Scott, you can stay on for just a couple minutes. We'll see if we can answer or do some question and answers.
Sure.
Let's see.
Come over here, Scott.
One from, do you do any plant propagation yourself at the garden?
Was it a question about irrigation?
Oh, do you do any plant propagation yourself?
Well, actually, I don't personally do it, but I have a young guy that's been working in the garden alongside of his father for a number of years, and he has really gotten interested in the whole thing. He's been going over to the Theater Payne Foundation and learning from them over there. And so we've got a lot of volunteers, plant volunteers in our yard. And so he's been digging them up and potting them so that we can put them in other yards around the neighborhood, which we've already started doing.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So.
Well, great. Another question. Do you work with a hardscape/landscape architect to help you plan and build structure? The person's asking, are there many in your experience that understand California native plant gardening?
I'm amazed how few people do get into it that are in gardens all the time. The one group that I would really like to get converted are the developers. There on our street, there are just gazillions of homes being built, and not a single one of them is doing native plants in their landscaping. So there's lots of work to be done.
A good question here too. How many bird boxes are in your yard?
I'll field that one. I'm being COVID safe here because we're right next to each other. You can hear me okay, right?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. Thinking about it, I would say that there's probably at least 30 boxes, and those boxes are servicing, I think, 9 species of birds in the garden. The largest one would be a barn owl box, and then down to the smallest would be wren boxes. And I do want to add something to that is, if there's any habitat that you want to put in your garden to help birds, like you just want to help out a set of birds, it's putting in nesting boxes, because we never leave dead or dying trees in our yards. We always remove them. And that's habitat. And the way to replace that habitat is by putting out bird boxes. Because in those dead and dying trees, woodpeckers would normally excavate homes for themselves for a season, and then they leave and create a new home the next season. Well, what that does is it leaves homes for all these other birds. And if you were to have some of these cavity nesting birds coming in your yard, they're going to want food, water, shelter, right? But they also want a place to nest, and they're looking for a place to nest, whether it's nesting time or not. So it's a very important part of habitat to have in your yard.
Great, thanks, Scott. Maybe another question for you is, were you able to ID the 9 bat species from photos, or were you also able to use audio recordings?
Yeah, so the way that I do it is with audio recordings. We're recording them every night. I know that any time of the year we'll have at least 2 species of bats in the garden. Sometimes we'll have 4 species on a particular night. But what I do is I download those recordings once a month, and I run them through some sophisticated software that basically steers me in the right direction. And then I vet the sonograms to make sure it is IDing the bat correctly.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a bit impossible to do it otherwise.
That's so cool. I have one last question, because we're running right up against 7, but maybe a question for both of you. Do you have to protect some plants from deer in the yard?
Oh yeah, as you know, we still get deer.
There was evidence on these photos, yeah.
Yeah. We do. We put, screening around some of the plants for a while.
Which species do you see the
Oh,
herbivory?
the elderberry and some of the ceanothus.
Mm, mm.
I'll add my 2 cents into that. This is because there's not like some, plants that are candy to deer, like roses and things like that. The majority of plants in Susan's garden are plants that are available to these deer out in wild areas. So it's not as if they're coming intentionally to the yard to eat her plants, which happens with some of these non-native plants that deer love to eat so much. So yeah, like Susan says, on some newer plants that are nice and tender and yummy, they will go after, but for the most part, they leave her garden alone.
Mm.
We used to have some leftover roses on the edge of the patio from the previous owner of the home, and they managed to survive without a whole lot of water. But every now and again, the deer would come up and eat them, and it was just such a thrill to see them that close. I didn't mind that they ate the roses. And by the way, I do have some California native roses, which they so far haven't found.
That's great.
Maybe they don't like them. I don't know. Anyway,
Well,
this has been a pleasure.
Yes, thank you both so much. It was just really a pleasure tonight, and we're seeing the audience loved it. So thank you
Yes.
so much for everything.
All right,
Somebody says they just ordered both books.
Oh, great.
well, thank you very much, you guys.
All right, thank
Thank
you
you.
everyone. Good night. Thanks for
Good
tuning in.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, take care.